I mean, what about how many times the Bible switched hands? All those big editing sessions done by the Vatican or, anything from Constantinople. What about how many times the Bible has switched hands and been translated? You don't think that man is fallible, man has greed, so you don't think that man had the opportunity to switch around a few words or maybe even change the perspective? You don't think that's possible in its more than 1,500-year history? You have a firmly held belief. I assume this is the way that you define your faith, is a firmly held belief, an absolute deep truth that I think you're kind of getting to a point where, you base faith on a lack of logic. It's a deep belief without any ground or, as you put it, leg to stand on. So why is faith good?
I make a distinction between gullibility and wise faith. Gullibility is blindly believing without any evidence. I think you and I would be fools to be gullible.
And I kind of look at faith in that same way.
I disagree.
How do you make the distinction between gullibility and what you call wise faith?
Wise faith demands evidence before you trust.
What is your evidence?
For what?
Let's say the evidence of what happened to Jesus Christ or the bio of Jesus Christ is real. Where's your evidence?
Okay. Where's your evidence that Michigan State is going to grant you a diploma on your day of graduation?
I don't have evidence because that's not something that's set in stone. It's a variable. It could happen, it could not.
Well, then why do you give as much money and work to Michigan State to earn a diploma? Do you just blindly do that, or is there some evidence that Michigan State is a reliable institution of higher learning?
I know that there are people who have done it before me. I know, and I've explained the process and have engaged in a contract with the university that if I complete that process, I will get that. It's a contract.
Good. So there is evidence. That is the foundation of your faith that on your day of graduation, you're going to be given a diploma.
It's not a faith, it's an agreement.
Sir, that is faith.
Okay.
You cannot prove to me that Michigan State is going to give you a diploma on your day of graduation.
So can you prove to me that Jesus Christ was resurrected on the third day? Can you prove to me that he walked on water and performed miracles?
Sir, I can prove to you nothing in life. To prove means to show it cannot be another way.
I agree. I
don't base my life on proof. I base my life on evidence. The evidence is Michigan State will grant you a diploma. That's why I think you're wise to trust Michigan State. The evidence is Jesus Christ is reliable. That's why it's wise to trust him. What is that evidence? The evidence is historical in nature. It's his lifestyle, the way he treated people. It's the content of his ethical teaching, what he taught in the Sermon on the Mount. It's the way he died.
But you have evidence that you're pointing out the good things about the story of his life that doesn't, however, tell you definitively that the story was true. You take Jesus Christ, who was, we all know the story of Jesus Christ. Now let's look at 2,000 years before Jesus Christ when the Egyptians were writing the bio of Horus, who was born of a virgin, he had 12 disciples, he raised people from the dead, he walked on water. He cured the sick. He was called the healer, the way. He was put to death, and after 3 days, he rose from the dead. That's a lot of, in that same light that you bring to Jesus Christ, that's a lot of good evidence about Horus, too. That's also a lot of good evidence that the bio of Jesus Christ is not only questionable, but also plagiaristic. All these religions have evidence that this has happened. They all have historical record. But where is Jesus trumping all these other ones?
It's very, very simple, sir. When you study Egyptian religion, almost none of it is based on history. It's making a claim to communicate truth through mythology. Fine, that's a possibility. But please don't make the mistake of saying that Osiris, Isis, the others, gods of Egyptian religion are historical, because they're not. And that claim is never made that way. And the way you try to insist that, oh, no. The Bible borrows from Egyptian mythology when it says that Jesus rose 3 days later. No, it does not at all borrow from Egyptian mythology.
Or even the 25 other Mediterranean gods that all had the same kind of aspects to their lives. Almost all of them were born to virgins. Several of them were born on the 25th of December.
Well, obviously, Jesus was not born on December 25th, and obviously...
Oh, it certainly wasn't.
Obviously, the only reason we celebrate that is because back in the 4th century, when Christianity became accepted in the Roman Empire, December 25th was chosen because it agreed with other religions.
Paganism.
Yeah, exactly. But so what? I mean, December 25th is not the birth of Christ. It's an agreed upon civil holiday.
Well,
That's
yeah,
all
but
it
it's made to meet. It matches up. See, that's what I'm saying. I mean, she brought up the question of what if, how do we know that the Bible, you can't. I mean, you admit, and I appreciate you admitting the fact that you can't prove anything to anyone and such a thing as pseudoscience. But you're bringing about this evidence, and my question still kind of remains: where has the evidence for Jesus Christ trumped any other religion? Because you're also talking about historical evidence here. I want to, just to note, there is no third-person source that cites or says anything about Jesus Christ. Where we have independent sources of information that can collaborate the story of Muhammad, we have independent sources of information that have collaborated the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the original Buddha's lifetime and kingdom, and yet we have nothing. We have not even Romans kept a record or made any mention of Jesus Christ, and the Romans were meticulous at that. So, where is your confounding evidence that builds Jesus Christ above all of these others that are all claiming they have historical evidence?
No,
They're all
they're not.
claiming.
We just established that. Read Egyptian religion. They are not making historical claims.
Okay, take Egyptians out of it. You can take any number of other world religions, and the scenario is the same.
No, it is not. It is not. Muhammad was an historical person, obviously. Siddhartha Gautama Buddha was an historical person, obviously, as was Jesus. But the avatars of Hinduism are not historical people.
Okay.
And the Egyptian mythological gods are not historical people.
So then how do you put Jesus Christ above Muhammad and Buddha?
All right. You better have some tests that you use to determine whether any document is historically reliable. For myself, I have 4 tests that I use on any document that claims to be historically reliable. My 4 tests are internal consistency, meaning by that, are there contradictions within the text that point to massive confusion on the part of the authors? When you read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll notice no contradictions. Different perspectives, but no contradictions. Tremendously internally consistent. Second test, literary style. Is the literary style of the document once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wink and Blink and Nod took a boat ride? No. The literary style of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is, at this time, in this place, with these people around, Jesus said this, he did that. It reads like the New York Times. Third test, archaeological evidence. Are we talking about the island of Atlantis out in the ocean? No. We're talking about Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, Rome, archaeologically verifiable places. Fourth test, haven't you ever played the game telephone? You sit in a circle, whisper the secret into the ear of the person next to you, and they whisper it into the ear of the person seated next to them. And by the time the secret reaches the end of the circle, it's been totally perverted. Yes, I've played that game. No, that is not how we have the Gospels today. The Gospels that we have in English today are based on over 5,200 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript, dated from the 2nd through the 10th century AD, found from Rome, Italy, down around the Mediterranean to Alexandria, Egypt, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. There is no document from antiquity that can even approach the New Testament Gospels in manuscript evidence. Does that mean it's the Word of God? No, obviously not. Does it point to it being historically reliable? Absolutely yes.
What is your religion? I mean, I assume you're Christian, but
I'm a follower of Jesus Christ.
you have no specific affiliation other than that?
No.
And what about how many times the Bible switched hands? I mean, how the diet of worms and all those big editing sessions done by the Vatican, or anything from Constantinople. What about how many times the Bible has switched hands and been translated? You don't think that, man is fallible, man has greed, so you don't think that man had the opportunity to switch around a few words, or maybe even change the perspectives? You said a second ago, it reads like the New York Times. Plenty of people won't read the New York Times because they don't think that the words are false, but they think it's very misleading. You don't think that's possible in its more than 1,500-year history?
Well, what you have is the authors of the New Testament dying based on their claim that they had seen Jesus Christ risen from the dead. Now, when you watch Catch Me If You Can, he began to realize that that young man was very, very deceptive. And he was posed as a Pan Am pilot, and he posed as a doctor in an emergency room, and he posed as a lawyer. The guy played by Leonardo DiCaprio hadn't done any of that, but he lied his way through it. But the point is, he lied in order to benefit himself. The first century followers of Christ who wrote the gospel said, we saw Christ risen from the dead. It didn't benefit them. It led to their martyrdom.
So persecution is verification?
If I claim to have seen something, and you tell me, deny it and live, or else maintain that you did see it and we'll kill you for it, I can promise you, sir, you don't have to be a PhD in psychology to know human beings will crack under that pressure.
Well, yes, but maybe back then they did believe it. If someone back then saw the northern lights, they would be convinced that it was something from God. They have no idea that these are things caused by trapped ions in our magnetosphere. They didn't know that back then. There are plenty of natural phenomena. They had no idea what was going on. And so they more than likely almost always interpreted it as something from God. And yet what I'm saying is maybe they really did believe it was real. Maybe it really did seem real to them. Maybe they were convinced, but just because they were convinced and just because they were persecuted does not mean they were verified in fact.
We don't have a situation of the northern lights, sir. In 1 John chapter 1, the Apostle John writes, that which we've seen, that which we've heard, that which we have handled with our own hands, this Jesus we're proclaiming to you. It is a clear historical claim. We were eyewitnesses. We ate food with him. We heard him teach. We watched him die on a cross. And 3 days later, we saw him risen from the dead. And our buddy Thomas didn't believe us when we told him. And our buddy Thomas said, not unless I can see him with my own eyes, not unless I can take my hands and put the nail prints in his hands, will I believe. And suddenly Jesus stood there, walked up to Thomas and said, my man, right here, take your hands and put them in the nail prints in my hands, take your hand and thrust in the spoon wound in my side, and Thomas stopped doubting and believed. So, sir, that's an incredible eyewitness claim. They are either lying through their teeth or they're speaking the truth. The northern lights ain't got a thing to do with this. Seeing signs in the sky ain't got a thing to do with this. Having a feeling inside that might be indigestion that I call encountering God has nothing to do with this. This has to do with we saw him, we put our hands in the nail prints in his hands, we talked with him, we ate food with him, this Jesus rose from the dead. That's the claim. They're either lying through their teeth or they're speaking the truth. If they're speaking the truth, it's the most important message in the world today, that God really does love you, that there really is life after death, and that if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, he gives it to you as a gift. You don't want to look a gift horse in the face too many times and say no. That's not a good move.
Just want to know what happened to those people who don't go to heaven, and like about maybe people who haven't heard Jesus' message like we have, or stuff like that.
Okay, good question. I got to divide your excellent question into two parts. First part is, what about those who've never had the opportunity to hear about Christ? How is God going to judge them? I do not know. Why? Because obviously Jesus never answers the question.
Yeah.
And for me to pose like I can fill in the blank is absurd. All right, but Jesus and the Bible make 5 points that apply to your excellent question. First point, God is just, right? Jesus pounds that point home. God is just. Now, you guys really got to think about that, okay? Because one gentleman out here just earlier today was saying, I think everything's relative, right? And what I want you to ask yourself is, the American Bar Association is comprised of a lot of lawyers. It's the biggest volunteer organization in the world, I think. Something like 400,000, right? It's big. Now, if a lawyer in a court of law begins to notice that a judge is discriminating, is prejudiced, they are allowed to file a legal complaint. You see, deeply rooted within you and me is an understanding of justice. And my point is, that's one of the biggest pieces of evidence that God exists. You and I understand that morality is not all relative. A lot of morality is relative, but there are a few moral absolutes. Isn't that why this guy's in the armed forces? you have an understanding of justice, I would presume. Right? And you're committed to honor, duty, loyalty, promoting justice, right? And I respect you for that. Okay, but are those real? Or are those just an American bias? Which would be horrible. If we're hiring him to go out and kill people to promote American bias, that would be horrible. But if we are saying, sir, we're asking you to defend our country and to promote justice, not to kill someone to keep gas prices low at the pub, but instead to stop the slaughter of innocent people. See, then we're on holy ground, I'm convinced. Then we're in touch with reality. All right, now what Jesus insists is God is just, which means nobody's going to get ripped off. Second point, Jesus insists the only reason people go to hell is because they choose to live their lives separate from God. And on the day of judgment, God simply grants their request. All right? Third point, nobody goes to hell because of ignorance. Nobody goes to hell because they didn't hear about Jesus, that's for sure. The only reason people go to hell is because they flip God off, and God says, fine, I respect your free will. I gave you free will in the first place. You want me to stay out of your life? I'm stepping back. I'm out of your life. Not only that, the Bible insists there are going to be a lot of people in heaven who never heard the word Jesus. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rahab, a Gentile prostitute. Obviously, they never heard about Jesus. They were born hundreds of years before him. But in humility, they put their faith in God. They're going to be in heaven. And finally, Christ insisted that the only reason anybody's going to be in heaven is because he bled and died on a cross. No one's, as you and I talked about, no one's going to be in heaven because they were a good old boy. Because good old boys, like me, are sinners. And we need God's forgiveness, his grace. And that's what Christ offers us through the cross. Okay, so ultimately, I do not know how God will judge those who've never heard about Christ. I do know it will be fair and just. I do know there are going to be a truckload of people in heaven who never heard about Christ. But I also know that the only way to heaven is through the death of Christ, where he sacrifices his life to take the hit that we deserve for our wrongdoing. Now, what about those who have heard about Christ? Reject him. Well, Christ is really clear on that. If you reject Jesus, you're rejecting God. If you reject Jesus, secondly, not only are you rejecting God, but you are rejecting the vehicle through which God offers you forgiveness and eternal life. His son Christ, who died on a cross for our sin. So if I reject Christ, I have to answer to God for the wrong that I have done. I have to pay for the wrong that I have done. I will go to hell. Not because God wants me to go to hell. He wants me to go to heaven. That's why he sent his son Christ. I will go to hell for one reason, because I want to. In other words, I think I know the theme song of hell. The theme song of hell will be, I did it my way. That's the only reason people go to hell.